Thank you everyone for joining us today. Whether this is your first webinar with Dr. Brylske or this is your sixth, we are happy to have you. This is our sixth episode of our Oceans Update series, and today's topic is fluoro diving, a new way to experience the reef at night. My name is Sabrina Severin, and I am the Ocean Health Education and Conservation Coordinator here at Diventures. I am thrilled to introduce you today to our host, Dr. Alex Brylske, or just remind you about all of his amazing credentials if you are returning. Dr. Alex Brylske is the founder of Ocean Education International, a consulting firm focusing on environmental education and professional development for the marine tourism industry, specializing in the recreational scuba sector. He is currently the Director of Education at Reef Smart and is also the author of The Complete Diver and Beneath the Blue Planet, which can both be purchased at your local Diventures. Dr. Brylske holds a Master of Arts in Instructional Systems Design, a Master of Science in Marine Biology and Coastal Zone Management, and an EDS and PhD in Science Education with a technical specialty in oceanography. He has a unique and diverse background that combines education and marine conservation, and we are honored to share this knowledge and passion with you today. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and I hope we can all learn about this cool way to night dive together. Dr. Brylske, it's all yours.
Thanks, Sabrina. Well, welcome back for those of you who've been in previous webinars, and welcome for those of you who are here for the first time. We're going to continue with our standard format, which means, come on. There we go. I'm going to spend just a few minutes reviewing a couple of interesting developments, newsworthy elements that are, I think, pretty relevant to us as divers, as you see here. And of course, our main thrust today is going to be talking about fluoro diving, which involves UV lights, as we'll talk about. And then as the travelogue, and you'll see there's a rationale for this, I'm going to talk about Roatan and the Bay Islands of Honduras. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and talk about, you may have already heard in the news that there is a pretty severe El Nino predicted, which always has major consequences for the Earth generally, but for coral reefs, because it's essentially a warm water phenomenon. If you see on the image there, the circled red, that is El Nino. El Nino is part of an ocean atmosphere interaction actually called the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. El Nino is the oceanographic component where essentially cold water, which is held against the west coast of South America due to normal oceanic conditions, is released due to the cessation of the winds, which is the atmospheric component. And all that, and that warm water is forced from the west eastward. And that basically, that area that's circled in red should not be red. And that, of course, can have all sorts of knock-on effects weather-wise. Hopefully, one of the positives, it will decrease our chances of hurricane development through shear winds in the Caribbean. Also, this morning, in fact, I wasn't even able to get this to Sabrina to list on the on the website, but the Allen Coral Atlas, which is a wonderful worldwide survey of coral reefs that they've photographed and documented. And with that data, they've put various overlays that you can log on and basically excerpt whatever data you want. And the newest one, as you see here, is the coral bleaching survey. So if you want to kind of keep track of what reefs are potentially at risk for bleaching in real time, you just click the link there and you see right there that the areas so far on the what's known as the tropical Eastern Pacific, and unfortunately in the Coral Triangle, I'll be going to the Philippines next month, so I'm hoping not to see any bleaching. But it's a wonderful resource and quite useful. So stay tuned for announcements in that regard. The other thing that I came upon last month was a really interesting article on Nat Geo's website on restoring reefs in Roatan. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do Roatan as the travelogue as well. We'll get into the details about Roatan, but you can kind of see from the map where it is. And if you were with us last month, I talked about the Cayman crown and the wonderful Nova video that was produced on this reef that should not be as healthy as it is. It's perhaps the healthiest coral reef in the Caribbean. And it actually is affected a great deal by water coming out of that little bay, which is actually Guatemala. And quite nearby in Honduras, in the town of Tela, there's a similar situation. So there seems to be something going on in this corner of the Western Caribbean that is good news for coral reefs in that regard. Roatan is quite close by. And as always, all of these news articles can be linked. You can link to from the website. Another interesting little tidbit, there was a study released showing that light pollution from coastal areas is having a demonstrable impact on coral spawning. As you may know, that coral spawn at night relative to a phase of the new moon or the full moon. And because of nearby light pollution, they found that that can alter the spawning by a couple of days. And that may not sound important, but when you consider the need for the corals to spawn in synchrony, that could have an impact on the success of fertilization. So, and then I spoke several months ago about a return of a problem in the Caribbean with the black spiny sea urchins dying off again. And lo and behold, it's been reported in the Gulf of Aqaba in the Red Sea. It's in the northeastern portion of the Red Sea. Stay tuned whether it's the same problem. They did identify in the Caribbean, there is an organism called a ciliate that is causing the disease. They've not gotten that far, to my knowledge, in the Red Sea. But anytime you see the sea urchins in this condition, as you see on the left, there is an authority to report that incident to. You should. And if you want more information on that, just send me an email. So anyway, what we want to really talk about mostly today is fluoro diving. And I thought the best way to kind of introduce that was to show you a short, absolutely fantastic video that was produced by Phil Nicklen, who is the head of an organization called Sea Legacy. So without any further ado.
During the day, you see everything. But at night, you're forced to witness only what is in front of your beam of light. You're entering a completely new world. It's like you're flying through a galaxy and the stars are all the little critters flashing in front of your light beam. It really forces you to focus on individual characters. The octopus come out to hunt. The moray eels are cruising across the reef. It's when the sharks get really active in their hunting behavior. Meanwhile, all the daytime characters have gone to sleep in the reef. It's really something remarkable. But the one thing I've always really wanted to try is biofluorescent photography. Our job as filmmakers, as storytellers, is to show people a world that they will otherwise never experience or get to see. And so I needed somebody who could dive at night, and Marcelo is the perfect character for this journey. He's just a really good person and who happens to be also an exceptional diver.
I got a phone call from Paul Nicklen, and he said, "You are on Sea Legacy next month. Let's go." Okay. We spent 3 months together, diving every day, documenting, filming, flying drones, you call it. It was one opportunity of a lifetime I'll never forget. Done 4,000 dives around the world and hundreds of night dives documenting the underwater world. And I was looking for one method of filming the nocturnal behavior differently. And that's when I came across the blue lights. And the moment I switched the blue lights in the reef, everything was glowing. All these beautiful green colors, yellow, oranges, very psychedelic.
I was super excited to use these blue lights in the form of art. When shined on certain corals and some animals, the protein re-emits fluorescent pigment as biofluorescence, glowing a bright neon color. As I'm watching this biofluorescent light show of psychedelic colors on the bottom of the sea, it reminded me of growing up and watching the aurora borealis dance across the night sky of the Arctic. It is a very intense, meditative, and immersive experience. Something like a flounder during the day is brown, gray, so ordinary. But to see it glow under the fluorescent lights, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. When you see it in a new way, under a new light, you realize how little we know about our ocean. Here we have this very complex, rich, diverse ecosystem that we barely understand. To think we've lost 60% of the biodiversity on Earth, and yet we're focused out there in space and we're all moving to Mars. Instead of looking up into the deep black sky, look down into the deep blue ocean. And it is the most mind-blowing, rich ecosystem that is designed to feed us, to keep us alive, to give us the oxygen we breathe. This is what we need to be taking care of. This is what we need to be obsessed with. What I really love is I can now take all of these visuals and have them analyzed from a scientific point of view. Perhaps there's new discoveries. Perhaps we've just delved into a world that people have not seen before.
People ask me what changes I've seen throughout my life, and I can clearly tell you that I've seen changes happening within weeks. Reefs that were completely healthy years before, now there's only rubble, no fish at all, as if that was a war zone, and it shatters my heart. It is 100% clarifying. There's no question, climate change is real. If the ocean dies, you're doomed. It's my legacy to create this whole package of images and give it to the world so we can make a difference.
You can, as a filmmaker, come back with something that is so unique, so beautiful, so special, that it reaches in and grabs people by the heart. That's the beauty of the art, the science, and the conservation all working together. Right now, we're still in a solution period. These ecosystems can recover. They can find balance again. And that's what gives me hope. We just have to do our part to give these places a fighting chance.
Pretty inspiring. We'll get into some of the photographic techniques as a little bit later as well, but here's a good example of something you may have swum right by. These are macro photos. You can see there's only a few little polyps. So none of these images are more than an inch or two across. And importantly, none of these images were taken with any artificial light, and they were taken at daylight at depths of between probably 70 and 100 feet. And keep that in mind. This is actually what's called a great star coral, or Montaster cavernosa. It's noted for this ability to fluoresce, as we'll see. Here, I want you to guess something. I'm going to show you two colonies of that great star coral. They're approximate to one another, as you'll see. And you'll notice one is very different in terms of color. And I want you to think back to your training and what you were told about color rendition and absorption. And I want you to guess at what depth I've shot these videos. So here we see this brilliantly glowing orange, and there is no, this is all available light. There's no video lights at all. And you'll notice that I'm in 102 feet of water off of Bonaire. What gives? My instructor told me that red disappears at 12 feet. And here it is at 102 feet. So what is happening? This is really the phenomenon at hand. Another example, this just last month I took off Fort Lauderdale. The same species, Montastera cavernosa, noted for this fluorescence. And here it is in 70 feet of water with available light. Now, the pigmentation, the cells that create this are not necessarily throughout or covering the entire surface. And here you see an example of this colony of cavernosa that has a little bit of the fluorescent pigments in that one small little polyp there. Likewise, other species. This is a rather unusual or rare species in the Caribbean. It's one of our few solitary corals. It is a single polyp, Scolomia, and on the left we see it fully populated with these fluorescent pigments, and yet on the other side a different colony has none whatsoever. So it's a not a common, but it's not really that uncommon a phenomenon, which would go completely unnoticed in the daytime, which is in that case. Now, before I get into fluorescence, there's a lot of confusion over what it is and what it isn't. I want to distinguish some phenomena here. Fluorescence is not bioluminescence. Bioluminescence is a biochemical reaction where a protein called luciferin interacts in the presence of oxygen with an enzyme called luciferase, and the end result is light rather than heat. And you, of course, are probably most familiar. Here's a video shot off Southern California during a certain form of plankton bloom. And you can see as they disturb the plankton, both the boat and these dolphin, they're activating these microorganisms that are creating this bioluminescent. And as you see from the text, it's actually quite common in the ocean. In fact, when you night dive in the ocean, certainly in the tropics, if you simply switch your light off and just wave your hands back and forth, you'll see a light show without having to do anything else. So that's quite common. Fluorescence is also not chemoluminescence. And here our example are the ubiquitous chemical lights, the Siloom sticks. This is a chemical reaction with, as you see, hydrogen peroxide and sodium hydroxide, which is in a little glass vial. It's in a bath of luminol, the same stuff the CSI guys use. You break it apart, and the result are these various colors. Now, environmentally, I hope that you are not using these things, because these are one-time use. They just contribute to plastic pollution. And while you do need a marker light at night, I would encourage you to get one of the electric, the powered sources that use batteries, because those will last forever and you don't have to leave behind at your destination another piece of plastic that the ocean doesn't need. And then, of course, the other phenomenon that's confused with biofluorescence is phosphorescence. And phosphorescence is simply the ability for a substance, a compound, to absorb light and then re-emit it over time. And we see this in most of our submersible pressure gauges. And commonly, divers will, quote, charge their SPG with their light so that they can look at it at a later time, a few minutes later, and it's still illuminated. That is strictly a chemical reaction. So what is fluorescence? Forgive me, but let's step back into your high school physical science class for a minute and understand the electromagnetic spectrum. All electromagnetic energy is the same phenomenon. The only thing that differs is the wavelength. And you see here wavelengths from extremely long wavelength radio waves to gamma rays. basically the longer the wavelength, the lower the energy. And so as a result, we can have radio waves pass through our body our entire lives 24/7 with no ill effects. But if we're exposed to gamma rays for even a few minutes, that can mean death by radiation poison or cancer, whatever. So basically, the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. And you can kind of see the way this works. Now, as humans, over the course of evolution, we have evolved to detect a very, very narrow range of what we interpret as visible light. Now, color does not exist. Color is simply the way our brain interprets certain wavelengths of light in a spectrum that's important for us to survive. But there are other near visible ranges. And in particular, we're going to be looking at the infrared range, at the ultraviolet range. Infrared is mostly associated, if you remember, with heat and whatnot. And so you see, this is kind of getting toward the danger zone. And one of the reasons we're concerned is that UV light, as you're probably aware, can cause cancer. So there is an issue to be concerned with in this regard. But let's take a look at the physical or at the visible spectrum. And you see here, red, blue, green, each of them has a different wavelength. And you'll notice in particular that because blue has the shortest wavelength, it has the highest energy potential. Red, of course, has the longest wavelength and has the least energy. It's the reason red is absorbed so quickly, because it can be more easily absorbed and due to the fact that it has less energy. So that's a little bit of just kind of the background stuff. But what about this whole idea of fluorescence? Essentially, fluorescence, as you see, is a property where a substance can absorb light at some wavelength or color and re-emit it at another lower energy state. So bottom line, you kind of see we excite this molecule, and by exciting it, we cause that little electron to jump orbits, which is a higher energy state. In that higher energy state, it cannot remain indefinitely, and so it will jump back to a lower energy state. But that photon that is created in the process is a lower energy, and therefore it's emitting, in this case, red. Here's an animation. So here you see at the left, green coming in, causing excitation of that electron. It jumps back to its original state, and off comes a photon of red light. That is fluorescence. And it turns out that biological organisms, in addition to other non-biological entities, can express this light. It is not reflected light. And so what has been discovered is that biological organisms, many of whom can create these molecules called GFPs, green fluorescent pigments, or green fluorescent proteins. And within that molecule, there is a segment called a chromophore that is able to do what I just showed you on the previous animation. So that's kind of the crux of how things kind of get started. Now, in some cases, this phenomenon occurs naturally under normal lighting conditions, as I showed you with that giant star coral. But in most cases, overwhelmingly, to see these fluorescent pigments in other organisms, you have to be at night, and you have to excite them with a UV or a near UV wavelength light, as you see depicted here. The wavelength in question, as you see, is between this range of 440 nanometers. That's a millionth of a meter. And it turns out that it's actually better to use light that is kind of in the bluer range near UV than it is direct UV light. And you see the difference on the lower image there. Makes sense, because that bluish light is what most marine organisms have evolved in, and therefore it's certainly understandable that that's the case. The big question, of course, is why in the world or what purpose does fluorescence serve? And with regard to coral reefs, We've only learned some of this very recently, as you kind of see the studies I've cited there from 2019 and 2022. Because there was a lot of speculation without a lot of direct knowledge as to why in the world would this phenomenon occur in corals. And it turns out that's not just one reason. We found out recently that the zooxanthellae, as I've talked about in previous seminars, the little algae that live within the coral, well, they exist in the water column and they're looking for a place to call home. And it turns out that they can somehow sense the ultraviolet light from these GFPs and use it as a homing signal to know, hey, this is a good place to live. Secondly, as was suspected for a while, the GFPs can take that potentially harmful ultraviolet light and reduce it to a less harmful or harmless level of visible light. And so in essence, they're acting as sunscreen for the shallow corals in particular. Now, in the deeper corals where they don't have to worry about the UV light, another little trick is that they can take light that is not what's known as photosynthetically active radiation, PAR, which is basically orange-red light. Or rather, they can take the green and blue light and reduce it to PAR light. And so it's kind of assisting the deeper water corals in getting a light for the zooxanthellae to create sugars and food. In deep water corals, we suspect that the fluorescence is a way to attract prey. And there's some indication that this could be an antioxidant function. We all know about, taking antioxidants and whatnot. And it's suspected that this is one way that the corals can accommodate or desensitize the oxygen species that are being created. From a practical standpoint, you can see that biofluorescence has a big use here. The way that we look at the recruitment of corals is to look at often these ceramic tiles are placed on the reef, and then scientists will go and look for signs that there's been a little coral larva settle and begin to form. And on the left, you see in daylight, where is it? You have no idea. There's a lot of calcareous algae and all kinds of fouling growth there, et cetera. But at night, if you look at those two pretty spectacular green blobs, those are newly settled coral. The same on the bottom. So this is a really important tool in assessing the health of coral reefs with regard to settlement of new corals. Same thing here. Imagine picking out that little dot under normal light, whereas at night with a UV light, there it is. And at the bottom, you have what's called the founding polyp. Here is a larva that has settled, has metamorphosed into the first polyp and is beginning to secrete limestone. So they're really, really vital tools in coral restoration and assessment. Tomorrow, there's going to be a wonderful webinar by Dr. Derek Peterson, who is with Secor, as some of you may know. Diventures supports them. And they are really in the vanguard of using sexual reproduction and scaling up coral restoration. And this is just a quick video of how they are using UV light just to keep track of a little coral planula. The little greenish glob there is a planula that's trying to sniff out a spot in order to settle. And it's easily discernible under UV light. So be sure to check out either attend the webinar or the recording thereof. The folks down in Bonaire with the Reef Renewal program. This is what's known as a reskinning operation. This is where small segments of corals from a nursery are put on and accelerate the damage they incur, accelerate their growth, and they begin to grow out and cover the entire dead colony. And here you see them luminesced with UV light. A few years ago, in fact, as you see there, 2010, this was published in the Indo-Pacific, not so far in the Atlantic yet, but they have seen instances where corals, as we go in, as the water heats up, rather than fully bleach, they fluoresce. And it turns out that that's a mechanism where the corals are trying to reduce the stress of the intense light by producing these pigments through GFP production, and kind of staving off and maintaining stability, allowing the corals to continue to feed the zooxanthellae to stay there. And it's as I said, it's a recent phenomenon, and it's not yet been, to my knowledge, reported in the Atlantic, but it is another way in which these GFPs appear to be helpful to the health of the coral reef. I just thought I'd throw out, it's not just corals. When you dive with the UV light, all kinds of things, from fishes to invertebrates. One of the most spectacular in the Caribbean are fireworms. Fireworms, unfortunately, I don't have a picture, but fireworms will biofluoresce in a spectacular way. There have even been 2 species of sharks that we have no idea why, but they also biofluoresce. So it's a light show involving many of the organisms you're going to see in a coral reef. Now, the GFP, it's called green fluorescent pigment, but the gene itself can mutate. And some of those mutant forms will actually fluoresce different colors. This has been commercialized because, as we'll get to later, the really important implications of GFPs is that they can be incorporated into the cells of living organisms. And one of the ways they've been commercialized in the aquarium trade is through glowfish. And each of these glowfish have been modified for a GFP of a particular color. And if you'll notice, a lot of saltwater aquariums today, they are displayed in UV light. The reason you get these dramatic colors is the fact that it's not white light, it's UV light that's causing them to biofluoresce. Now, as this is not a marine phenomenon exclusively, there are other organisms that have and can actually see. We cannot see UV. We have 3 color cones: red, blue, green. And whatever color we see is whatever combination of red, blue, green our brains and our cones and our retina can interpret. And birds, however, many birds, not all, can see in the UV. And so let's take the example of a bird, a rather drab-looking bird that may be indistinguishable from another, because in our view, but to a bird, it may look like what you see on the right. And that's because they have cones that are specifically able to sense these UV wavelengths. And so indeed, this phenomenon is actually pretty ubiquitous in organisms. And there's really, this is really a place to talk about, the most sophisticated eye ever studied in any organism. And it's the
this shallow water predator is known for packing.
So that is the most advanced eye that's ever been studied. They have 16 different cones. Not only can they see UV light, they can see two forms of polarized light. So they by far have the most evolved eyes of any organism so far studied. And not to leave out the mammals, we don't really know why, but some mammals have actually been shown to biofluoresce as well. The platypus, some species of squirrels, and there's a spring hare, an animal in South Africa. And stay tuned as to why this may be necessary. We just don't know at this point. So to kind of conclude the sciencey part, as I said, this is a fundamentally important phenomenon. And the gentleman you see there, Professor Osamu Shimomura, actually won the Nobel Prize in 2008 for his discovery of the GFP in the Aurelia sea jelly there. And it's kind of interesting that what they actually found was the jelly has the GFPs, but when they fluoresce green, that interacts with another protein within them called angiotensin, and it emits blue light. So it's it's a complex process. The important thing from a human standpoint, as I said, there are cytogenic techniques where that gene can be adapted and actually put into the genome of another cell, and that cell and the replicants from that cell will biofluoresce. And so you're able to track through UV light the evolution of cells in various disease processes. So this is an extremely important technological procedure that's helping to cure and treat disease. And if you're interested, the book there, we'll get into that in detail. So thank you, Dr. Shimamura. Practicality, couple of things. Just to kind of show you photographically, while blue light is the source, we're also really looking at the UV sector as well. But when you photograph the blue light, most photographers are interested in filtering out the blue and seeing only the UV fluorescence. And you can kind of see at the bottom there the difference between, on the left, the blue light unfiltered and the filtered fluorescent light. The same can be the same situation for a diver. Some divers will prefer to wear a yellow mask lens, but I'll be perfectly honest with you, I've made dozens of fluoro dives. I don't see the experience in any way diminished not having a yellow lens. I do have a yellow lens. It's kind of a pain to put on and whatnot, and I would not discourage anyone from fluoro diving just because they did not have access to a yellow lens. But if you're a photographer, it will become an issue. You will need a yellow filter. A couple of the dive industry manufacturers are responding to that. I know recently SeaLife has come out with a kit. This is their UV FluoroBeam Kit. The light has a white light, and then you click it and the white will turn off and the UV will appear. And likewise, there are two other companies, Fire Dive Gear and Night Sea. Both of these are actually founded by divers and who are physicists, by the way, and they have a lot of wonderful resources on their websites and a lot of videos that I would encourage you to look at as well. So that's pretty much the issue on fluoro diving. I absolutely encourage you, the next time you're making a night dive on a coral reef, get yourself a UV light. In fact, try it out in the freshwater. I've never done that, and it might turn out to have some interesting consequences as well. Okay, as I said, we want to talk about Roatan and actually the Bay Islands in general. It's quite a popular destination for Diventures. Multiple operators. I think Anthony's Key, Cocoa View, Turquoise Dive Center. Here are the dates and a little bit of orientation. You kind of see Honduras in the image, and that little island chain to the north. Those are the Bay Islands of Honduras. I think there are about 40 of them, of both islands and small keys, but the major ones are Utila, Roatan, and Guanaja. They're actually the tops of a mountain chain. This mountain chain, there's a lot of tectonic activity, with all the earthquakes, et cetera. There's a lot of plates colliding and all kinds of tectonic activities, I said. And this is actually called the Banaka Ridge. And these are just emergent mountains that have created the islands of the Bay Islands of Honduras. A little bit of history. What you see there in the image, that's Columbus' fourth and last voyage. And it's germane to this discussion because he, quote, discovered, I love that, how he discovered this place that was been inhabited for 15,000 years. He landed at Guanaja, actually not on Roatan. This is one of the areas that was heavily disputed with England. Most of Central America, as you can imagine, was settled by Spain. However, the Bay Islands were actually disputed, and they were in fact a British colony from about 1830 to about 1860. In fact, Great Britain abolished slavery 30 years before the United States. And when that happened, the first non-indigenous population to Roatan were freed Africans from the Cayman Islands. In fact, an interesting little side note, I went to Roatan for the first time in 1983, and it was very much an Afro-Caribbean culture. It was much less developed. In fact, we had to make 2 passes in the DC-3 plane. We had to make 1 pass to scare the goats off the unpaved runway, and then we landed. And it was very much, it was not really a mainland Hispanic culture. It was very, as I said, Afro-Caribbean. And over the course of the years, as the island has developed, it has changed remarkably. Very interesting place culturally. Because of its proximity to the trade routes, but its remoteness, it was a real pirate haven for a long time. And it's just culturally a very, very interesting place to visit. From a conservation perspective, they are very much in tune. All of the organizations you see here, the links of which are on the website, are very, very active. You saw as in the beginning the article from Nat Geo about the restoration. Most of the dive operators on the islands either participate or have host nurseries. You have ample opportunity there to participate in some of these restoration activities, and the Bay Islands Conservation Association is quite active. So this is really a real forward-thinking place environmentally. And it's certainly a diver's haven. Here's in this map 174 dive sites around the island. Now, one of the things about Roatan, it's oriented east-west. And if you think about other islands in the Caribbean that are oriented north-south, the prevailing trade winds don't really allow a lot of diving on the windward side of the island because it's too rough. The swell is coming in full blast, and it's really not diveable, 90% of the year. But with the islands that are oriented more east-west, such as Cayman, another one, you certainly still get the trade winds, but those swell are refracted enough so that the wave energy isn't as intense, and hence you can dive all the way around the island. And I'm sure there are probably more than 174 sites. So it is absolutely positively diver's paradise. And then lastly, here's a plug for my organization. I'm a board member of the REEF Environmental Education Foundation. And on Monday, we sponsored a Fishinar, which are regular webinars on fish ID and other issues. The webinar was on Roatan fish. Good news, it was recorded, and there'll be a link on the website. And if you're going to be visiting Roatan or any of the Bay Islands in the near future, I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's really, really well done. A lot of the fish in the Bay Islands and on Roatan are rare, and some are endemic, meaning they don't occur anywhere else. And there's a lot of subtleties to some of these fish. So I would strongly, strongly encourage you to take a look at that. And with that said, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Upcoming, there will not be a update next month. Our next meeting will be on August 23rd. And I'm going to talk about what the difference is between a healthy reef and an unhealthy reef. We sometimes have this impression that, this doesn't look quite right or whatnot. Well, we'll talk about some of the details and what parameters there are and what conditions really set things in one direction or another. And I'll go ahead and turn things over now to Sabrina. And in fact, I'll go ahead and close out of my window here.
All right. Thank you, Alex, so much. As Alex mentioned, we are having another webinar tomorrow with Secor, June 22nd. It is at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. I did put the link in the chat if you want to register for that, and then I'll send you the Zoom information. Alex, thank you so much for that very informative presentation. I know I learned a lot, and also I have been to Roatan. I stayed in Utila for a while, and although I didn't get a dive in Roatan, I did get a drive around the island, and it's breathtaking. It's beautiful. So if anyone ever has the chance to travel there, even if you're not diving, it's wonderful, and the people are amazing. So definitely try to visit there if you can. If anyone has any questions for Alex about this cool night diving technique, please feel free to either unmute and ask, or you can put them in the chat and I can ask him for you.
I could not have been that thorough, so please. There's no such thing as a dumb question.
Well, I'll throw one out there. I've seen some people with ultraviolet lights on their night dives. Is that any sort of a negative impact on the marine life that we're going to look at?
There's no indication there's been a lot of use of UV lights. I guess if you held a UV light, first of all, there are different wavelengths, UVA, A, B, and C. Fortunately, most of the C is filtered out by our ozone layer. A and B are the ones we have to worry about in terms of skin cancer. But I think for it to be, it's just like us, for it to be an issue, the exposure would have to be so long that it would be impractical. So the fact that we're flashing a UV on a coral or even a fish is really, I think, completely irrelevant. I've not seen any researcher or any conservationist bring that up as an issue. And I think it's because of the extremely short duration the organisms are exposed to it.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to ask the same question, so I'm glad you asked that. Does anyone else have any questions, or has anyone else done this kind of diving or have any cool stories? Or
I'd like to know if anyone else has done any UV, and I'd really like to know if anyone's ever done it in freshwater. That would be interesting to take one of these into a lake or a quarry and see what other critters might fluoresce, because I don't think anyone's done that from a scientific perspective.
Well, I'll give it a whirl because I've been eyeballing a UV light, and I live in a freshwater locale, so I will report back my findings.
Yep, that'll be quite interesting. You might inspire a whole different area of research.
Or I might send it back.
Okay.
Is there a particular wavelength in a light that?
Yeah, if you send me an email, the Underwater Kinetics, the company that makes dive lights, they have a really wonderful video that the president actually produced, and he explains the decision that they made to select the wavelength that they utilize in theirs, and there's some rationale. It's a little technical, but basically you'll see that it's really the blue end, not quite at the UV level, that we get the best results from photographically. And I can send you the link to that video if you just drop me an email.
I will do so.
Yeah, hi folks. I thought there'd be some more questions on that. Well,
someone in the chat, let's see here. Someone asked, where is the video about the fish ID webinar?
It's on the website. So if you can link to it, there's only one link that I was not able to get to Sabrina in time, and I'll send that to her. But everything else, all the news articles, all of the references to the UV lights, to Roatan, et cetera, will be on the Oceans Update website.
Yep, so if you go to the Diventures website and then the About Us tab, you can click on Oceans Update, and it should be in a big box that says episode 6. And it will say references found here. And then once the video is over, we'll also link to the recording as well. So you can find the recording there, and then also the link for that fish ID. And then also in the chat, Gerald says, I have read that crawfish glow, supposedly under UV. We have those at Atlantic, so I will do my best. Our Corey here by Omaha. So we'll see if we can see anything glow. I went out there a couple weeks ago and the visibility was about a foot. So
Yeah, lobster do. I've seen you might there's something called a slipper lobster, which is kind of an ugly little critter, but quite delicious actually. And they do biofluoresce.
really neat. And then Jim says, I have a UV/blue torch, and I've usually been the only one with UV on the dive. Buddies say it's easy to keep track of me on the night dive since my torch is blue. Bonus feature.
Exactly. And by all means, the other thing, this may sound strange, but I always encourage, my students, spend some time with no light. I mean, you want to see bioluminescence, turn off all the lights and just, move your hands around and depending on the moon phase, you'd be surprised at how much ambient light is underwater. And it's something that people, there's debates often among divers as to, do you want this huge light that's going to, like a second sun, or do you want a smaller light that really only highlights what you're looking at and not scaring the dickens out of everything else on the reef? And so there's a debate in that regard as well.
Yeah, I will say, I feel like this is a newer way of night diving. I learned so much, so maybe that's why you've been the only one with a blue light. Maybe it's just becoming more popular now. And for the bioluminescence, I will say, when I was in Utila, we were able to do that. We all shut our lights off, and it feels kind of funny because you're just sitting there flailing your hands and arms around the water, but it is so cool to see everything in the water kind of light up. It's a really neat experience. So for those of you who haven't been able to do that, I hope you one day have the opportunity and can see that unique phenomenon.
Yeah, the other thing too that reminded me, you'll find some lights now will have a red and white. Red light is good because think about it. Marine creatures had no need to evolve a lot of discrimination for red light because it wasn't around. And so you can turn red lights on and not disturb a lot of marine organisms. You have enough light to see, but you don't really have the same disturbance in terms of a white light. So you may consider one of those red-white options as well. I know Light and Motion has one of those, and I think there are a couple other manufacturers as well. Is that it?
All right, anyone have any other questions or comments?
Gone once, gone twice. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure, folks, and I have a good summer, and see you in August. And again, I'm very sincere. If you have any questions, just drop me an email. I'll be happy to respond and provide any other information I can.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you.
joining. Yeah, we hope to see you in August for our next webinar, or tomorrow also for the Sea Corps one. Come to both.
Thank you. Had a great time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.